The mob boss pressed the gun against my temple while his men held me down. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was watching him beat my 17-year-old son to death right in front of me, and not being able to do anything about it. He made a mistake that night, though. He thought I was just another nobody. He forgot to ask what I did before I became a father. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. My name is Dominic Carter, and 6 months ago, I had a simple life. I worked as a warehouse supervisor at a logistics company. Nothing fancy. I paid my bills on time, kept my head down, and raised my son, Evan, by myself. His mother left when he was 2. Couldn't handle the responsibility, she said. So it was just me and him against the world. Evan was 17. Smart kid. Honor roll student. He wanted to study engineering at State University. We'd sit at the kitchen table every night after dinner, and he'd show me his college applications. His eyes would light up when he talked about his future. That light is something I'll never see again. It happened on a Tuesday night in April. I remember because Evan had just finished his chemistry project, and we ordered pizza to celebrate. We were watching a basketball game, arguing about which team would make the playoffs. Normal father-son stuff. The kind of moments you don't realize are precious until they're ripped away from you. Around 10:30, someone knocked on the door. Hard. Aggressive. Not the kind of knock from a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. I looked through the peephole and saw 3 men in dark suits. My instincts kicked in immediately, the same instincts I'd buried for 12 years. Something was wrong. Stay in your room, I told Evan quietly. He heard the tone in my voice and didn't argue. He headed toward the hallway. I opened the door just a crack, keeping my body blocking the entrance. Can I help you? The biggest one smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Dominic Carter? Who's asking? That's when he kicked the door open so hard it slammed into my face. I stumbled backward, tasting blood. Before I could react, 2 more men rushed in. They moved fast, professional. One grabbed my arms and twisted them behind my back. Another punched me in the stomach so hard I couldn't breathe. Dad, Evan's voice came from the hallway. No. Stay back. I shouted, but it was too late. One of the men grabbed Evan and dragged him into the living room. My son fought back, tried to swing at them, but he was just a kid. They threw him on the floor next to me. Then he walked in. Victor Santino. I didn't know his name then, but I'd learn it soon enough. He was in his 50s, gray hair slicked back, expensive suit, gold watch. He looked like a businessman, but his eyes were dead, cold. Victor pulled up a chair and sat down in front of us like he was visiting old friends. He lit a cigar and took his time with it. Dominic Carter, he said slowly. You know why I'm here? No, I said honestly. My heart was pounding. I don't know you. I've never seen you before in my life. Victor smiled and looked at Evan. What about your boy? He's seen something he shouldn't have. Evan's face went pale. I don't. 3 nights ago, Victor interrupted. You were riding your bike past the warehouse on 10th and Marshall Street. Around midnight. You stopped and looked through the fence. Didn't you? Evan's eyes went wide. He had been out late that night. Said he was studying at a friend's house. I didn't know he'd taken his bike through that part of town. I didn't see anything. Evan's voice cracked. I swear, I was just riding past. Victor took a long drag from his cigar. That's the problem, kid. You were there. And my associates don't like witnesses. Even if you didn't see nothing, you could've. He's just a kid. I pulled against the men holding me. He didn't see anything. He doesn't know anything. Please. Victor looked at me with those dead eyes. You got kids. Dominic, you know the world's a dangerous place. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. That's just life. Take me instead. I begged. I wasn't ashamed to beg. Not for my son. Whatever you're worried about, whatever you think he saw, take me. Let him go. He won't say anything. I promise. Please. Victor stood up slowly and walked over to Evan. He crouched down and grabbed my son's face, looking him in the eyes. Your daddy loves you, kid. That's sweet. But this ain't about love. This is about making sure nobody talks. Please. Evan whispered. Tears ran down his face. Please, I won't say anything. I swear. I swear on my life. Victor stood back up and nodded to his men. They dragged me over to a chair and tied me to it with zip ties. Tight, cutting into my wrists. I struggled, but there were too many of them. Then Victor did something I'll never forget. He took off his suit jacket, folded it neatly, and handed it to one of his men. He rolled up his sleeves, and he looked at me. I want you to watch this, Dominic. I want you to remember what happens when people see things they shouldn't. No, I screamed. No, please. Take me. Kill me. Not him. He's 17. He's just a kid. Victor ignored me. He walked over to Evan, who was being held by two men, and then he started hitting him. Not with a weapon, with his fists. Slow, methodical, like he was teaching a lesson. Evan cried out. He begged. He looked at me with so much fear and pain that it broke something inside me I didn't know could break. I fought against the zip ties until my wrists bled. I screamed until my voice gave out. But I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. Victor beat my son for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When Evan stopped moving, stopped making sounds, Victor stepped back and wiped his hands on a towel one of his men handed him. He walked over to me and crouched down so we were eye to eye. You talk to the cops. You're next. Understand. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at my son's body on the floor. Victor put his suit jacket back on, straightened his tie, and walked out like nothing happened. His men followed. The door closed behind them. The zip ties were loose enough that I worked my way out after a few minutes. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely move. I crawled over to Evan and pulled him into my arms. His face was swollen, blood everywhere. He wasn't breathing. I held my son and I screamed. Not words, just sound, raw and broken. But underneath that grief, something else started to grow. Something cold and sharp. Because Victor Santino made one fatal mistake that night. He assumed I was just another nobody. Just another warehouse supervisor. Just another single dad. He never asked about my past. He never asked what I did before Evan was born. He never asked why a man with my skill set was working a dead-end job in a quiet neighborhood. Before I was Dominic Carter, the warehouse supervisor, I was Sergeant Dominic Carter. Delta Force. 12 years. 3 tours. Specialized in infiltration, reconnaissance, and targeted elimination. I left that life behind when Evan's mother abandoned us. I promised myself I'd be a father, not a soldier. I buried that part of me deep and never looked back. But Victor Santino just dug it back up. And now he was going to learn what happens when you take everything from a man who knows 1,000 ways to take everything from you. I called 911 at 11:47 p.m. that night. My voice was flat when I spoke to the dispatcher. I told them my son was dead. I told them someone broke into my house. I didn't tell them who. The paramedics arrived first. They checked Evan's pulse even though we both knew he was gone. Then the police came. 2 uniformed officers, young guys who looked uncomfortable. They asked questions. I answered like a robot. Did you see who did this? It was dark. They wore masks. How many were there? 4 or maybe 5. I don't remember. Can you describe them? No. It happened so fast. They looked at each other. They knew I was lying, but they couldn't prove it. One of them gave me a card and said a detective would follow up. Then they took Evan away in a black bag. I watched the ambulance drive off with my son's body and felt nothing. The grief was still there, buried under something colder. 3 days later, I was sitting in my living room staring at the wall when someone knocked. I opened the door and saw a man in his 40s wearing a cheap suit and a tired expression. Mr. Carter? I'm Detective Blake Morrison. Can I come in? I stepped aside. He sat down on my couch and pulled out a notebook. He didn't waste time with sympathy. I read the report from the officers who responded. Blake said, and I'm going to be straight with you. Your story doesn't add up. I said nothing. 4 or 5 masked men break into your home, beat your son to death, and leave you alive? They don't take anything? They don't rob you? They just leave. He leaned forward. That's not a random home invasion, Mr. Carter. That's an execution. I don't know what you want me to say. Blake rubbed his face. He looked exhausted. I've been working organized crime in this city for 8 years. I know Victor Santino's signature when I see it. Your son saw something, didn't he? Something Victor didn't want him to see. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice steady. I don't know anyone named Victor Santino. Victor runs half this city, Blake continued. Drugs, gambling, extortion. He's got judges in his pocket, cops on his payroll, lawyers who can make evidence disappear. I've been trying to build a case against him for 3 years, and every time I get close, witnesses disappear or change their stories. He paused. I can't touch him, Mr. Carter. Not without evidence. Not without someone willing to testify. Then why are you here? Blake stood up and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back. Because I wanted to look you in the eye and tell you the truth. If you go after Victor yourself, you'll end up dead or in prison. And your son's death will mean nothing. He handed me his card. If you change your mind and want to talk, call me. Otherwise, stay out of Victor's way. After he left, I threw his card on the table and went back to staring at the wall. The funeral was on Saturday. Gray sky, cold wind, barely anyone there. A few neighbors who felt obligated. My old boss from the warehouse. Evan's chemistry teacher. A kind woman named Mrs. Palmer who cried through the whole service. I stood by the casket and didn't cry. I couldn't. Everything inside me was frozen solid. The pastor, some guy the funeral home provided because I didn't go to church, said generic things about eternal peace and better places. I stopped listening. Evan didn't believe in any of that anyway. He believed in science and evidence and things you could prove. After the service, I was standing alone by the grave when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Dominic. I turned and saw Tristan Wade. We served together in Delta Force. He was my spotter on half a dozen missions. Saved my life in Kandahar when an IED went off too close. I hadn't seen him in 8 years. Tristan, how did you? I still keep tabs on the guys from our unit, he said quietly. Heard about Evan. I'm sorry, brother. I'm so sorry. We stood there in silence for a while. Tristan was one of the few people who knew what I used to be, what I was capable of. I know that look, Tristan said eventually. I've seen it before. On missions when someone crossed a line they shouldn't have crossed. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. He put a hand on my shoulder. Whatever you're planning, don't. You've been out of the game for over a decade. You have a life now. Evan wouldn't want you to throw it away. I looked at him. Evan's dead. And going after whoever did this won't bring him back. It'll just get you killed too. Maybe. Tristan sighed. If you need help, I don't. Dominic. I said I don't need help. My voice was harder than I meant it to be. I appreciate you coming, Tristan, but I just want to be left alone. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You've got my number. If that changes, call me. After everyone left, I stayed by Evan's grave until the sun started setting. I talked to him in my head, told him I was sorry I couldn't protect him, promised him that Victor Santino would pay for what he did. Then I drove across town to a storage facility I'd been renting for 12 years. Unit 247. I hadn't opened it since the day I moved to this city with baby Evan in my arms. The lock was rusty, but it still worked. I pulled up the metal door and turned on the light. Inside was everything from my old life. Tactical gear, night vision equipment, encrypted communication devices, fake IDs, a locked case containing weapons I'd kept off the books, contact information for people who operated in shadows. I pulled out a black duffel bag and started going through it. The gear was old but well maintained. I'd always kept it ready, even though I never thought I'd use it again. At the bottom of the bag was a photo. Me in uniform, younger, harder, standing with my Delta Force unit after a successful mission in Iraq. We looked invincible back then. We believed we were. I put the photo back and started making a mental list. Victor Santino wasn't just some street thug. He was organized, protected, dangerous. Going after him directly would be suicide. Detective Blake was right about that. But Blake didn't know what I knew. He didn't have 12 years of training in taking apart organizations from the inside. He didn't know how to identify weak points, exploit vulnerabilities, turn allies against each other. Victor thought he was untouchable. But every empire has cracks. You just have to know where to apply pressure. I loaded the duffel bag into my truck and locked the storage unit behind me. As I drove home, I wasn't Dominic Carter, the grieving father, anymore. I was Sergeant Carter, and I had a mission. Victor Santino had 3 main lieutenants according to Detective Blake's frustrated rants. Felix, the enforcer. Kyle, the money man. Hunter, the drug distributor. Take them down one by one, and Victor's empire would crumble. Then I'd come for him, not with rage, not with revenge, with cold, tactical precision, the kind they taught me in Delta Force. For 2 weeks, I became invisible. I watched Victor's world from the outside, learning its rhythms, mapping its patterns. This wasn't about rushing in with guns blazing. That's how amateurs died. This was reconnaissance, the foundation of every successful operation. I started with public records, property ownership, business licenses, court filings. Victor operated through a web of shell companies, but the connections were there if you knew how to look. His legitimate businesses, a nightclub called Apex, 2 restaurants, a construction company, were fronts for laundering money. The real operations happened in the spaces between. I drove past his locations at different times of day, noting security cameras, guard rotations, delivery schedules. I sat in coffee shops across the street and watched who came and went. Patterns emerged. Tuesday mornings, a black SUV arrived at the nightclub's back entrance. Thursday nights, the same 3 cars parked in the alley behind his restaurant on 5th Street. Victor had 3 men who mattered. I'd heard Blake mention them, but now I needed faces, habits, weaknesses. Felix Caruso was easy to spot. 6'4", built like a linebacker, always wore dark sunglasses even at night. He was Victor's enforcer, the one who handled problems with violence. I watched him break a man's arm outside the nightclub for being late with a payment. He smiled while he did it. Felix lived alone in a condo downtown, drove a red Dodge Charger, and ate breakfast at the same diner every morning at 7. Kyle Morrison handled the money. Thin guy, nervous energy, always checking his phone. He dressed expensive but sloppy, like he bought designer clothes but didn't know how to wear them. I followed him to 3 different banks in one afternoon, each time carrying a leather briefcase. On Friday night, I tailed him to an underground poker game in a warehouse on the east side. He stayed until 4 in the morning and left looking shaky. Gambling problem. That was useful. Hunter Price ran the drug distribution. Mid-30s, cocky, wore too much cologne. He operated out of a shipping company near the docks, using legitimate freight as cover. I watched him meet with suppliers, count cash, coordinate deliveries. He thought he was untouchable because Victor protected him. But I noticed something interesting. Twice I saw him meet someone Victor's other men didn't know about. A side deal, maybe. Skimming from the boss. After mapping their routines, I needed access to their world. Not as a threat, as a ghost. I applied for a job as a night custodian at the office building that housed Victor's construction company front. It was a national cleaning service, minimum wage, high turnover. They hired me on the spot when I showed up with fake references and a story about needing work after my son died. The manager barely looked at my application. Perfect. The cleaning shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. I worked alone on the 3rd floor, where Victor's company leased half the space. The security guard, an old guy named Rowe, mostly slept at his desk. The building was dead quiet after midnight. Victor's people met there sometimes when they didn't want to be seen at the nightclub. The offices had thin walls. I'd push my cleaning cart slowly past conference rooms, emptying trash cans that didn't need emptying, wiping down surfaces that were already clean. And I listened. The first useful conversation I caught was between Felix and Kyle. They were arguing about a shipment. Victor's paranoid about the docks after that DEA raid last month, Kyle said, voice tight with stress. So move it somewhere else. That's your job, not mine. Felix sounded bored. It's not that simple. We've got 200 kilos coming in next Wednesday. That's a $12 million shipment. We need secure transport, secure storage, secure distribution. One mistake, and we're done. Then don't make mistakes." Their voices faded as they walked toward the elevator. I filed the information away. Wednesday, 200 kilos, $12 million. That was Victor's lifeline. Another night, I overheard Hunter on his phone in one of the private offices. He thought he was alone. "I told you, I can get you a better price than Victor charges." "Yeah, same quality, 30% cheaper." "Because Victor doesn't need to know about it. That's why." Pause. "Meet me Thursday at the usual spot. Bring cash." So Hunter was definitely stealing from Victor. Sloppy, greedy. Men like that made fatal mistakes. The following week, I spotted something else. Kyle came into the building at 2 a.m. Unusual because he normally avoided night meetings. He looked terrible. Sweating, pale, hands shaking. He went straight to a locked filing cabinet in one of the back offices. I was mopping the hallway but could see through the half-open door. Kyle pulled out a thick folder and spent 20 minutes photographing documents with his phone. Financial records, probably. Then he put everything back exactly as it was and left looking even more nervous than when he arrived. Kyle was preparing an insurance policy. Evidence to use if Victor turned on him. Or maybe evidence to sell if he needed to run. Either way, it meant Kyle didn't trust his boss. Another crack in the foundation. I spent my days sleeping and my nights working, watching, learning. I bought a burner phone and started building a network. Old contacts from my Delta days. People who'd left the military and gone into private work. Information brokers. Tech specialists. People who could get things that weren't sold in stores. One of them, a guy named Marcus who now ran a security consulting firm, helped me set up surveillance equipment. Tiny cameras, audio bugs, GPS trackers, all untraceable. I planted a tracker on Hunter's car when he stopped for gas. Another on Kyle's BMW outside the poker game. I placed a small audio device under the conference table in Victor's office during my cleaning shift, hidden inside a potted plant where nobody would look. The picture became clearer. Victor was planning something big. The 200-kilo shipment was just the start. He was expanding territory, moving into neighborhoods controlled by a rival crew. That meant potential war. That meant distractions. That meant opportunities. But I couldn't move yet. Patience was everything. Rush the shot, and you missed the target. I needed to understand the full structure. Who owed Victor money? Who feared him? Who secretly hated him? Every organization has people waiting for the king to fall so they can take his crown. On my third week as a janitor, I finally saw Victor in person again. He arrived at the office around midnight with Felix. They went into the private conference room and closed the door. I positioned my cleaning cart nearby and worked slowly. Their voices were muffled, but I caught fragments. "Felix, I need this handled quietly. Hunter's been acting strange. Keep an eye on Kyle. I don't trust him lately." So Victor was already suspicious of his own people. Good. Paranoia was a weapon I could use. When they left, Victor walked right past me. He didn't even glance in my direction. To him, I was invisible. Just another minimum wage worker pushing a mop. That's exactly what I needed to be. I went home that morning as the sun came up and spread everything I'd learned across my kitchen table. Photographs, notes, schedules, weaknesses. Hunter was greedy and careless. Kyle was desperate and paranoid. Felix was violent but predictable. 3 men holding up Victor's empire. 3 targets. I'd start with Hunter. He was the weakest link. Already betraying Victor, already making stupid moves. Taking him down would be easy and wouldn't immediately point back to me. Then Kyle. His gambling debts and hidden evidence made him vulnerable. I could destroy him without firing a single shot. Felix would be harder. He was dangerous, loyal, and always armed. But even the strongest soldiers have blind spots. I just needed to find his. After that, Victor would be alone. Exposed. Exactly where I wanted him. I pulled out a map of the city and marked locations. Hunter's warehouse. The poker game Kyle attended. Felix's morning diner. The dock where the shipment would arrive. Everything was connected. I just needed to pull the right threads and watch Victor's world unravel. 2 months ago, I was a father planning my son's college applications. Now I was a weapon with a target. Victor Santino took everything from me. Now I was going to return the favor, one piece at a time. Hunter Price was a creature of habit. That's what would kill him, not literally, but professionally. I'd been watching him for 3 weeks, and his pattern never changed. Every Tuesday and Friday night, he left Victor's warehouse at the docks around 11 p.m. and drove to an underground poker game on the east side. He'd stay until 3 or 4 in the morning, then head home alone. But Tuesdays were different. On Tuesdays, he made a stop first. I followed him from a distance, headlights off until I was far enough back that he wouldn't notice. He drove to a 24-hour diner near the interstate, the kind of place truck drivers stop for coffee and pie. Hunter parked in the back lot and waited. 10 minutes later, a white van pulled up beside him. The driver got out, Hispanic guy, 40s, wearing a leather jacket. They talked through Hunter's window for a few minutes. Then Hunter handed him an envelope. The guy gave Hunter a small package wrapped in brown paper. This was Hunter's side deal, the one Victor didn't know about. Hunter was buying product from an independent supplier and selling it through Victor's distribution network at full price, pocketing the difference. Smart in a stupid kind of way. Victor would skin him alive if he found out. I took photos with a telephoto lens from across the parking lot. Clear shots of the exchange, the license plate on the van, Hunter's face. Insurance, in case I needed it. After the van left, Hunter drove to the poker game like clockwork. I knew the location, a warehouse converted into a private club, members only, cash games with no limits. The kind of place where people lost houses and cars in a single night. I waited in the shadows across the street. My truck was parked 3 blocks away. I was wearing dark clothes, a baseball cap pulled low, and gloves. Everything I carried was untraceable. At 3:47 a.m., Hunter finally stumbled out. He'd lost money. I could tell by the way he walked, shoulders slumped, jaw tight. He was alone. Everyone else was still inside. He got into his BMW and started driving. I followed at a distance, lights off again. He wasn't paying attention, too focused on his bad night and whatever he'd been drinking. Hunter lived in a luxury apartment downtown, but he didn't go home. Instead, he pulled into a parking garage attached to a closed office building. It was empty at this hour, just fluorescent lights buzzing and concrete pillars casting shadows. Perfect. I parked on a lower level and moved quickly. Hunter was on the 3rd floor, sitting in his car with the engine off, probably trying to sober up before going home. I could see him through the window, head tilted back against the seat, eyes closed. I approached from his blind spot and tapped on the driver's window with my knuckle. Hunter jerked awake, eyes wide. When he saw me standing there in the shadows, he rolled the window down halfway, annoyed. "What do you want, man? You lost or something?" "Hunter Price." His expression changed. Wariness replaced annoyance. "Who's asking?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled the door open. It was unlocked because Hunter was an idiot and pressed a taser against his ribs. 50,000 volts. He seized up, unable to scream, and I caught him before he fell out of the car. I zip-tied his wrists behind his back and dragged him to the back of the garage where there were no cameras. It took less than 30 seconds. Nobody saw. Nobody heard. When Hunter came to, he was sitting against a concrete wall with my knee on his chest and a knife pressed lightly against his throat. Not enough to cut, just enough to remind him how easy it would be. What do you want?" His voice shook. "Money? I've got money. My wallet's in the car." "I don't want your wallet, Hunter." "Then what?" "Information." His eyes darted around, looking for help that wasn't coming. "I don't know who you are, but you're making a huge mistake. You know who I work for?" "Victor Santino." "I know." That scared him more. "Then you know he'll kill you for this. He'll kill your whole family." "My family's already dead." My voice was flat. "So let's skip the threats and get to the part where you tell me what I want to know." Hunter swallowed hard. "What do you want?" "Victor's shipment. The big one coming next week. 200 kilos. Where's it landing? Who's moving it? What's the route?" "I can't tell you that. Victor will." I pressed the knife a little harder. A thin line of blood appeared on his neck. "Victor's not here. I am." And you've got about 10 seconds to decide if your loyalty is worth bleeding out in a parking garage. Okay, okay. Panic flooded his face. The shipment's coming in Wednesday night. 11 p.m. Pier 7 at the industrial docks. It's hidden in a container marked for furniture imports. Company name is West Side Freight Solutions. Who's picking it up? Felix. He's bringing 3 guys for security. They'll move it to a storage unit on Maple Street, then distribute it through the usual channels over the next 2 weeks. What else? What do you mean, what else? That's everything. You're holding out on me, Hunter. I know about your side business. The supplier you meet at the diner every Tuesday. The product you're skimming from Victor. His face went white. How do you? Doesn't matter. Tell me about it. Hunter's resistance crumbled completely. He told me everything. The supplier's name was Carlos Mendez. Ran an independent operation out of Tijuana. Hunter had been buying from him for 6 months, moving about 20 kilos a month through Victor's network without Victor knowing. The profit margin was 60%. Does anyone else know? No, just me and Carlos. I swear. Where do you keep the product before you move it? Storage unit. Different one from Victor's. Unit 42 at Southside Self-Storage. I pulled back the knife and stood up. Hunter slumped against the wall, breathing hard. What are you going to do to me? Nothing. Nothing. I'm going to let you go. Confusion replaced fear. You're letting me go? Yeah. But here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, you're going to get a visit from the FBI. They're going to have an anonymous tip about your storage unit and your meetings with Carlos Mendez. They're going to arrest you. And when they offer you a deal to testify against Carlos in exchange for reduced charges, you're going to take it. But Victor will think I'm a rat. Victor's not going to think anything. Because you're not going to mention his name. Not to the FBI, not to your lawyer, not to anyone. You're going to take the fall for the side business and keep your mouth shut about Victor's operation. Why would I do that? Because if you mention Victor's name to anyone, I'll send Victor proof that you've been stealing from him for 6 months. And we both know what he does to thieves. Hunter stared at me, trapped. You're serious. Completely. I cut the zip ties off his wrists and walked away, leaving him sitting there in shock. By the time he found his courage and stumbled back to his car, I was gone. The next morning, I made an anonymous call to the FBI tip line. I gave them Hunter's name, the address of his storage unit, and details about his Tuesday meetings with Carlos Mendez. I didn't mention Victor. This wasn't about Victor yet. By noon, Hunter was in custody. By evening, it was on the news, local drug distributor arrested, connection to Mexican cartel, ongoing investigation. I watched the report from my apartment and felt nothing. No satisfaction. No relief. Just cold calculation. Hunter was out of the picture. Victor had lost his distributor and his connection to an independent supplier he didn't even know existed. More importantly, Victor now knew someone was moving against him. He just didn't know who or why. 1 down. 2 to go. I pulled out my notes on Kyle Morrison. The money man. Nervous, paranoid, gambling debts piling up. He'd be easier than Hunter. I wouldn't even need to touch him. Sometimes the best way to destroy someone is to let them destroy themselves. Kyle Morrison was sweating through his designer shirt when he walked into the poker game on Friday night. I watched from my car across the street as he paid the door guard and disappeared inside. He was carrying a leather briefcase, probably $20,000 in cash, maybe more. Money he didn't have. I'd spent the past week digging into Kyle's finances. It wasn't hard. Men who are desperate make mistakes, and Kyle was drowning. He owed money to 3 different underground poker games across the city. He'd maxed out credit cards Victor didn't know about. And most interesting, he'd opened offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and moved almost $500,000 out of Victor's reach. Kyle was preparing to run. He just didn't know when. I was going to help him make that decision. The poker game ran until dawn. Kyle stumbled out at 5:30 in the morning looking worse than when he went in. Empty briefcase. Pale face. The walk of a man who'd just lost everything. He sat in his BMW for 10 minutes with his head against the steering wheel. Then he drove home to his expensive condo in the financial district. the one he could barely afford anymore. I didn't follow him. I already knew where he lived, where he worked, where he hid his secrets. Instead, I went home and opened my laptop. What I was about to do didn't require guns or violence, just information and timing. Kyle had been stealing from Victor for 8 months. Not much at first, a few thousand here and there, skimmed off the top of cash collections. But it grew. 10,000, 20,000. By my count, he'd moved almost $600,000 into those offshore accounts, hidden inside fake consulting fees and phantom expenses. Victor hadn't noticed because Kyle was good with numbers. He knew how to make books balance, how to hide money in plain sight. But he'd gotten greedy. And greedy men leave trails. I'd found those trails 3 weeks ago when I hacked into Kyle's personal laptop. He used the same password for everything: his mother's maiden name and his birth year. Amateur hour. His laptop had spreadsheets documenting every dollar he'd stolen, every transaction, every account number. He was keeping records as insurance, evidence he could trade if Victor ever turned on him. But insurance only works if you're smart enough to hide it properly. Kyle wasn't that smart. I copied everything. Bank statements, wire transfers, account numbers in the Caymans, emails to offshore lawyers, even photos Kyle had taken of cash before moving it, probably to keep track of amounts. Then I did something Kyle would never see coming. I sent it all to Victor. Not directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, I created an anonymous email account and sent the files to Victor's personal attorney, a man named Richard Castellano who handled all of Victor's legal problems and definitely had his boss's ear. The email was simple. Thought you should know what your money man is doing with your money. I hit send at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning and waited. By noon, my audio bug in Victor's office picked up raised voices. Victor and Felix were there, and someone else, probably Castellano. How long has this been going on? Victor's voice was ice-cold rage. At least 8 months based on these records. That was Castellano, calm and professional. He's moved over 600,000 into offshore accounts. Possibly more we haven't found yet. 600,000. Victor's chair scraped across the floor. That little weasel has been stealing from me for 8 months, and nobody noticed? He buried it well, Castellano admitted. Fake expenses, phantom consulting fees, creative bookkeeping. If whoever sent this hadn't done the work for us, we might never have caught it. Who sent it? Anonymous email. Untraceable. Could be someone in his organization trying to curry favor. Could be law enforcement trying to turn him. Could be a rival crew stirring up trouble. There was a long silence. Then Victor spoke again, quieter now, but somehow more dangerous. Find Kyle. Bring him to me. I want to look him in the eye when I ask him about this. What do you want me to do with him after? Felix's voice. We'll see if he's smart enough to tell the truth. If he lies, make an example of him. If he confesses, another pause. Take everything he has. Every dollar in those offshore accounts. Every asset. Leave him with nothing. Then throw him in the street and make sure everyone knows what happens to thieves. I listened to them plan Kyle's destruction and felt nothing. Kyle had made his choices. Now he'd face the consequences. That evening, Felix and 2 of Victor's men went looking for Kyle. They found him at a bar downtown, 3 whiskeys deep, probably trying to numb the pain of losing another 20,000 at the poker game. They didn't make a scene. Felix walked up, put a hand on Kyle's shoulder, and said something quiet. Kyle's face went white. He stood up without arguing and followed them outside. I was parked across the street, watching through tinted windows. They put Kyle in the back of a black SUV and drove to Victor's nightclub. Victor was waiting in his office upstairs. I couldn't hear what happened next. My audio bug had been discovered and removed earlier that day, probably during a routine security sweep. But I could imagine it. Victor would lay out the evidence. Kyle would try to deny it at first, then realize he couldn't. He'd probably beg, offer to pay it back, swear it would never happen again. Men like Kyle always begged. Victor wouldn't kill him. Murder drew attention, and Victor had already lost Hunter to an FBI arrest. 2 dead or missing lieutenants in 1 month would raise flags with law enforcement. No, Victor would do something worse. He'd strip Kyle of everything and leave him alive to suffer. 3 hours later, Felix and his men left the nightclub. Kyle was with them, but barely. They'd worked him over. His face was swollen, he was limping, and his expensive suit was torn and bloody. They drove him to a parking lot near the docks and threw him out of the SUV like garbage. Felix said something, probably a warning about what would happen if Kyle ever showed his face again. Then they drove off. Kyle lay there for a few minutes, then slowly pulled himself up and limped toward the street. I followed at a distance as he stumbled through the city like a ghost. He had no phone. Felix had taken it. No wallet. No car keys. Nothing. Eventually, he made it to a cheap motel and somehow convinced the clerk to let him make a phone call. I watched from my truck as he stood at the pay phone outside, receiver pressed to his ear, probably calling someone who could help him. Nobody came. By morning, Kyle Morrison had disappeared from the city. No goodbye, no forwarding address. Victor had his account numbers and passwords, taken during the beating, probably, and was already draining the offshore accounts. $600,000 returned to Victor's control. Kyle was ruined. Broke. Beaten. Scared. Everything he'd stolen, everything he'd built, gone in one night. 2 of Victor's 3 pillars were gone now. Hunter was in FBI custody facing federal charges. Kyle was a penniless fugitive with nothing but the clothes on his back. That left Felix Caruso, the enforcer, the true believer, the man who'd stood next to Victor for 15 years and never once questioned an order. Felix would be the hardest to break. He wasn't greedy like Hunter or weak like Kyle. He was loyal, dangerous, and smart enough to be paranoid. But every soldier has a weakness. Every man has something he loves more than he loves his boss. I just had to find Felix's weak spot and apply the right amount of pressure. And I had a pretty good idea where to start. Felix Caruso was a killer. He'd broken bones, burned buildings, and made people disappear without losing sleep. But every Sunday at 2 p.m., he drove to Greenfield Nursing Home and spent 3 hours with his mother. Her name was Maria Caruso, 82 years old, dementia, confined to a wheelchair. Felix paid for her private room, her medication, her round-the-clock care. The staff said he was a devoted son. They had no idea what he did for a living. I watched him visit her for 2 Sundays before I made my move. He'd sit beside her wheelchair in the garden, hold her hand, and talk to her even though she barely recognized him anymore. Sometimes she'd smile. Sometimes she'd call him by his father's name. Felix never corrected her. He'd just smile and keep talking. It was the only time I ever saw him look human. On the 3rd Sunday, I arrived at the nursing home an hour before Felix. I was wearing khakis and a polo shirt with a volunteer badge I'd made using a laminator and a photo printer. Nobody questioned it. Nursing homes were always grateful for volunteers. I found Maria in the common room, staring out the window. A nurse was helping another resident nearby. Mrs. Caruso? I sat down beside her with a warm smile. I'm Thomas. I'm a new volunteer here. Mind if I keep you company for a bit? She looked at me with cloudy eyes. Do I know you? No, ma'am. But I heard you like to talk about your son. Felix, right? Her face lit up. Felix. My boy. He's such a good boy. Comes to see me every week. That's wonderful. You must be very proud of him. Oh, I am. He takes care of me. Pays for everything. I don't know what I'd do without him. We talked for 20 minutes. She told me stories about Felix as a child, how he protected his younger sister from bullies, how he worked 3 jobs to help pay bills after his father died. She had no idea what he'd become. I didn't tell her. That wasn't the point. When Felix arrived, I was gone. But I'd planted something small in Maria's room, a tiny listening device hidden inside a picture frame on her nightstand. Nothing illegal about listening to a conversation in a semi-public space. And I needed to understand Felix's routine, his state of mind. Over the next week, I listened to their conversations. Felix talked to his mother about safe things, the weather, old memories, family stories. He never mentioned Victor or his work. Maria would drift in and out of lucidity, sometimes forgetting where she was, sometimes remembering everything with perfect clarity. Felix was patient with her, gentle. It was strange seeing a man who'd beaten my son to death act so tender with his own mother. But I wasn't here to sympathize. I was here to destroy him. The plan came together when I overheard Victor talking to Felix about his growing paranoia. Hunter's arrest and Kyle's betrayal had shaken Victor badly. He suspected someone was moving against him. Maybe a rival crew, maybe the FBI, maybe someone inside his own organization. "I need you close," Victor told Felix. "You're the only one I can trust now. I want you with me 24/7 until we figure out who's doing this." "What about my mother?" Felix asked. "I visit her every Sunday. Skip it this week. Family can wait. Loyalty comes first." There was a pause. Then Felix said quietly, "Understood." But I could hear the tension in his voice. Felix would do what Victor ordered, but he didn't like it. That gave me an opening. The next morning, I went to Victor's office building during my custodian shift. Security had been tightened since Kyle's betrayal. More cameras, more guards, random searches. But I've been working there for 2 months. They knew my face. I was invisible. I planted evidence in Felix's locker in the employee break room. A small recording device, the kind undercover FBI agents used. I'd bought it from a law enforcement supply store, still in its packaging. I tucked it into Felix's gym bag between his clothes, making it look like he'd tried to hide it but done a sloppy job. Then I made an anonymous call to Victor's personal line from a burner phone. I disguised my voice, higher-pitched, nervous. "Mr. Santino? You don't know me, but I work in your building. The custodian crew. I saw something I think you need to know about. That guy Felix? I saw him hiding something in his locker. Looked like some kind of electronic device. I don't want trouble, but I thought you should know." I hung up before Victor could respond. 2 hours later, Victor and 3 of his men searched the building. They found the device in Felix's locker exactly where I'd planted it. I watched from the shadows as they pulled Felix into Victor's office. Felix was confused, defensive. "I've never seen that before," Felix insisted. "Someone planted it. This is a setup." That's what Kyle said too. Victor's voice was cold. Right before I found $600,000 in his offshore accounts. "Boss, I've been with you for 15 years. I've never betrayed you. Never. Hunter worked for me for 8 years. Kyle for 10. Loyalty doesn't mean what it used to, Felix. I'm telling you, someone's trying to turn you against me. Think about it. Hunter gets arrested, Kyle gets exposed, now this? Someone's playing you." Victor was silent for a long moment. "Maybe. Or maybe you're just better at lying than they were." "Boss, get out. I need to think." Felix left the office looking shaken. For the first time since I'd started watching him, he looked scared. Over the next 3 days, Victor had Felix followed everywhere. Felix knew it and didn't resist. He was trying to prove his loyalty. But Victor's paranoia was a poison that couldn't be cured with obedience. On Thursday, Victor made his decision. He called Felix into his office one last time. "I don't trust you anymore," Victor said simply. "Maybe you're innocent. Maybe you're not. But I can't take that risk. You're out. You're firing me? I'm letting you walk away alive. That's more than I gave Kyle. Take it and disappear. If I see you again, I'll assume you're working with whoever's coming after me, and I'll handle you accordingly." Felix stared at his boss, the man he'd served for 15 years, and realized there was no arguing. Victor had made up his mind. "What about my mother's care? The nursing home bills? Not my problem anymore." Felix's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He walked out of that office knowing everything he'd built was gone. His job, his income, his purpose. All because of a device he'd never seen before. I watched him leave the building and sit in his car for 20 minutes, staring at nothing. Then he drove to the nursing home and sat with his mother, holding her hand while she slept. He didn't know who destroyed him. He didn't know why. He just knew his world had collapsed in 3 days, and the man he'd been loyal to had thrown him away like trash. 3 pillars gone. Hunter in federal custody. Kyle a broken fugitive. Felix cast out and powerless. Victor Santino was alone now, surrounded by low-level thugs who'd scatter the moment real trouble arrived. His organization was a shell, his paranoia eating him from the inside. And I was ready for the final phase. The trap that would take everything Victor had left and leave him exactly where he'd left me, watching helplessly as his world ended. Victor was falling apart. I could see it through the surveillance I'd maintained, hear it in the intercepted phone calls. He'd gone from a confident crime boss controlling half the city to a paranoid wreck who trusted nobody. His drug shipment, the 200-kilo delivery worth $12 million, was his lifeline now. Without Hunter to distribute, without Kyle to manage the money, without Felix to provide security, Victor was scrambling. He'd pulled in mercenaries from out of state, guys who didn't know the territory and didn't care about loyalty. They just wanted their cut. That shipment was supposed to arrive Wednesday night at Pier 7. But Victor had changed the plan after Felix left. He didn't trust the original location anymore. Too exposed. Too predictable. I knew this because I'd tapped into the phone of Victor's remaining contact, a man named Anton who coordinated shipments. Anton was careful, but not careful enough. One conversation gave me everything I needed. "We're moving it to the Riverside warehouse instead," Anton told Victor. "The one on Morton Street near the old factory district. It's isolated, no cameras, easy to secure." "Who knows about this?" Victor asked. "Just you, me, and the transport crew. That's it. Keep it that way. I'll be there personally to oversee it. I'm not losing $12 million because some rat decided to tip off the cops." Perfect. Victor was going to be there himself. Desperate. Exposed. Vulnerable. I had 5 days to prepare. The Riverside warehouse was exactly what Anton described. Isolated, abandoned, surrounded by empty factories and overgrown lots. The nearest occupied building was half a mile away. No witnesses. No security cameras. Just darkness and decay. I scouted it 3 times, mapping exits, sight lines, cover positions. There were 2 ways in. The main loading dock and a side door that had been chained but could be forced. The interior was mostly open space with rusted machinery and empty crates. Perfect for an ambush. But I wasn't going in alone with guns blazing. That's not how you win against someone like Victor. You don't match violence with violence. You match chaos with precision. I needed law enforcement. Specifically, Detective Blake Morrison. Blake had given me his card months ago after Evan's funeral. I'd ignored it then because I didn't want interference. But now I needed him, not as an ally, but as a weapon. I called him from a burner phone on Monday afternoon. "Detective Morrison, this is Dominic Carter." There was a pause. "Mr. Carter, I didn't expect to hear from you. I've got information about Victor Santino, the kind that'll put him away for life." "I'm listening." Wednesday night, 11 p.m. Riverside warehouse on Morton Street in the factory district. Victor's receiving a shipment of 200 kilos of cocaine worth $12 million. He'll be there personally with armed security. If you move fast and bring enough people, you can catch him red-handed. Blake was quiet for a moment. "How do you know this? Does it matter?" "It does if you're setting me up. Or if you're planning something that'll get people killed. I'm giving you Victor Santino on a silver platter, detective. What you do with that information is your choice. But if you want him, this is your shot. He's paranoid, isolated, and desperate. He won't get this careless again. Why are you doing this? Revenge. Call it whatever you want. Are you going to be there or not?" Another pause. "I'll need to verify this information independently before I can authorize a raid." "Then verify it. Check shipping records for West Side Freight Solutions. Monitor activity around the warehouse Wednesday evening. Do whatever you need to do. Just be ready when it happens." I hung up before he could ask more questions. Blake was smart enough to follow up. He'd make calls, check databases, coordinate with federal agencies. And when everything I told him checked out, he'd have no choice but to act. The chance to take down Victor Santino was too big to ignore. But I couldn't rely on law enforcement alone. Raids go wrong. Evidence gets suppressed. Lawyers find loopholes. I needed insurance. So I prepared a backup plan. I spent Tuesday gathering equipment from my old storage unit. Night vision goggles. A suppressed rifle I'd kept from my Delta Force days. Tactical gear. Communication equipment. Everything I'd sworn I'd never use again. I also prepared something else, a recording device and a script. If law enforcement failed, if Victor somehow escaped the raid, I needed a confession. Evidence so damaging that no lawyer could make it disappear. Wednesday arrived cold and gray. I spent the day running through every scenario, every possible outcome. By the time the sun set, I was ready. I arrived at the warehouse at 9 p.m., 2 hours before the shipment. I entered through the side door, forcing the chain with bolt cutters. Inside was darkness and silence. I moved through the space like a ghost, finding a position on the second-floor catwalk that overlooked the main floor. Good sight lines. Multiple escape routes. Concealment behind old machinery. I settled in and waited. At 10:30, Victor's men arrived. 6 of them, armed with automatic weapons. They swept the warehouse, checked the perimeter, then positioned themselves at strategic points. Professional. Disciplined. These weren't street thugs. They were hired soldiers. At 10:45, a semi-truck pulled up to the loading dock. The driver backed it in, and Victor's men started unloading. Large wooden crates marked with freight company logos. Inside would be the cocaine, hidden among legitimate cargo. At 10:50, Victor arrived in a black Mercedes. He stepped out wearing an expensive coat, flanked by 2 more armed men. Even from my position above, I could see the tension in his movements. He was on edge. Victor walked through the warehouse, inspecting the crates, talking to Anton and his security team. Everything was going according to his plan. What he didn't know was that 3 blocks away, Detective Blake Morrison was coordinating with 20 federal agents and local SWAT teams. They were waiting for my signal, a call I'd promised to make once I confirmed Victor was inside with the drugs. I pulled out the burner phone and sent a single text to Blake's number. He's here. Move now. Then I put the phone away and watched. It took 4 minutes for the raid to begin. The first sign was the sound of vehicles approaching fast. Multiple engines. Tires on gravel. Then spotlights flooded the warehouse from outside, so bright they turned night into day. FBI, drop your weapons. You're surrounded. Victor's men reacted instantly. Some raised their weapons. Others dove for cover. Anton was shouting orders, trying to coordinate a defense. But it was too late. Federal agents stormed through both entrances, tactical gear, rifles raised, moving with precision. Victor's hired soldiers realized they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. One by one, they dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Victor stood in the middle of the chaos, frozen. For the first time since I'd known of him, he looked powerless, small, afraid. But as the agents moved in to arrest him, something went wrong. Victor ran. He bolted toward the back of the warehouse, toward a door his security team had left unsecured. 2 agents chased him, but he was faster than he looked. He burst through the door into the darkness outside, exactly where I knew he'd go, because I'd left that door unsecured on purpose. Victor thought he was escaping, but he was running straight into my trap. I climbed down from the catwalk and slipped out through the side entrance. The chaos of the raid covered my movement. Nobody saw me leave. Outside, I moved through the shadows toward the old factory building adjacent to the warehouse. That's where Victor would run, toward the maze of abandoned structures where he could hide until the raid ended. I'd studied this terrain for days. I knew every alley, every doorway, every dead end. Victor was running blind, but I was hunting, and the hunt was almost over. Victor crashed through the dark factory grounds like a wounded animal. I could hear him gasping for air, stumbling over debris, panic driving every movement. Behind us, the warehouse was still lit up with spotlights and shouting agents, but the sound was fading as he ran deeper into the abandoned industrial maze. He had no plan, no backup, no weapon, just pure survival instinct pushing him forward. I followed 30 yards back, night vision goggles turning the darkness into green-tinted clarity. Every movement Victor made, every turn he took, I saw it all. He was running blind. I was hunting with precision. Victor ducked into a collapsed building, probably hoping to hide until the raid ended. The structure was 3 stories of rusted metal and shattered windows, a manufacturing plant that had been dead for 20 years. I circled around to the back entrance and slipped inside silently. The interior was a maze of machinery, conveyor belts frozen in place, old equipment covered in dust and graffiti. Perfect terrain for what came next. I moved through the shadows, listening. Victor's breathing echoed off the metal walls. Heavy, panicked, desperate. He was on the 2nd floor, hiding behind an old industrial press. I climbed the rusted stairwell without making a sound and positioned myself 20 feet from his location. Then I picked up a piece of metal debris and threw it across the room. It clattered loudly against the far wall. Victor bolted from his hiding spot, running toward what he thought was an exit. But I was already there, stepping out of the shadows directly in his path. He skidded to a stop, eyes going wide in the darkness. He started. I didn't let him finish. One movement, fast, efficient, and his legs were swept out from under him. He crashed hard onto the concrete floor, the wind knocked out of his lungs. Before he could recover, I had him pinned, knee on his chest, my hand around his throat. Not squeezing, just controlling. Remember me? My voice was cold and empty. Victor stared up at me, confused and terrified. Then recognition flickered across his face. The janitor? Try again. He squinted in the darkness, trying to see my face clearly. Then something clicked. His eyes went even wider. You're the warehouse supervisor. The one with the kid. His name was Evan. Understanding hit Victor like a freight train. His face went pale. That was months ago. You've been planning, watching, waiting. I pressed down slightly, making it harder for him to breathe. You took everything from me. So I took everything from you. Hunter's in prison. Kyle's broke and running. Felix is unemployed and abandoned. Your shipment's gone. Your organization's destroyed. And you're about to spend the rest of your life in a cell. You did all this? Victor's voice cracked. You destroyed my entire operation? You made it easy. Greedy men, paranoid bosses, loyalty built on fear instead of respect. I just applied pressure to the cracks and watched everything collapse. Victor tried to move, but I had him pinned completely. 12 years of Delta Force training versus a 50-year-old crime boss who'd gotten soft behind a desk. It wasn't even close. What are you going to do? He whispered. Kill me. No, that's too easy. You're going to confess. I pulled out a small digital recorder and held it where he could see it. His eyes focused on the device. You're going to tell me everything. Every murder you ordered. Every life you destroyed. Every crime you committed. And I'm going to make sure the police get this recording along with all the evidence they just seized. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'll kill you right here and disappear before anyone finds your body. You'll just be another casualty of a raid gone wrong. But if you confess, you live. You get a trial, a lawyer, appeals. You get to fight. It won't save you, but you'll have a chance. Victor stared at me, calculating. Then his expression changed, desperation turning into something uglier. You want a confession? Fine. I killed your kid. I beat him to death with my own hands while you watched. And you know what? I enjoyed it. He begged and cried like a baby, and it felt good to shut him up permanently. He was trying to provoke me, trying to make me angry enough to kill him quickly instead of letting him face prison. He thought death was better than spending decades in a cage. He was wrong about what would break me. Keep talking, I said flatly, holding the recorder closer. Victor realized his tactic wasn't working. The anger drained from his face, replaced by fear. You can't make me confess. I already have. You just admitted to murdering my son. But I want more. I want the others. The witness you disappeared last year. The rival dealer whose body was found in the river. The accountant who tried to leave your organization. All of them. I'm not saying another word. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder I'd been carrying. Inside were photographs. Felix's mother at the nursing home, Kyle's family members, addresses and schedules of people Victor cared about. Everyone is leverage, I said quietly. Everyone has something they don't want to lose. You're going to confess, Victor. The only question is whether I have to apply pressure to make it happen. Victor looked at the photos and his resistance crumbled. He knew I wasn't bluffing. I'd already destroyed his empire methodically and patiently. Threatening innocent people to force a confession was nothing compared to what I'd already done. You're a monster, he whispered. You made me one. Now talk. And he did. For 15 minutes, Victor confessed to everything. Murders, drug trafficking, extortion, witness intimidation. He named names, gave dates, described methods. The recorder captured every word. When he finally stopped, exhausted and broken, I stood up and backed away. What happens now? Victor asked. Now the FBI finds you here. And this recording finds its way to Detective Blake Morrison anonymously. You'll go to trial with so much evidence against you that no lawyer on earth could save you. And you? I disappear. You'll never see me again. But every day you spend in prison, you'll remember that a nobody warehouse supervisor destroyed everything you built. You'll remember that you killed the wrong man's son. Sirens were getting closer. The FBI was expanding their search perimeter. I had maybe 2 minutes before they reached this building. I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at Victor one last time. His name was Evan, and he was worth 1,000 of you. Then I vanished into the shadows, leaving Victor alone on the floor of a dead factory, waiting for the agents who would take him into custody. I made it 3 blocks before the search teams found him. 3 days passed before I heard the news. Victor Santino had been arrested following the raid at the Riverside warehouse. $12 million in cocaine seized. 8 of his men in custody. Federal charges including drug trafficking, racketeering, and organized crime conspiracy. But that wasn't the headline that mattered most. On the 4th day, Detective Blake Morrison held a press conference. I watched it from a diner across town, coffee going cold in front of me. We've also received evidence suggesting Victor Santino's involvement in multiple homicides dating back 5 years, Blake announced, standing behind a podium with the police chief and an FBI representative. An anonymous source provided recordings and documentation that we're currently analyzing. This investigation is ongoing, but we believe we have enough to pursue additional murder charges. My recording, the confession I'd extracted from Victor in that abandoned factory. I'd mailed it to Blake the morning after the raid, along with copies of everything else I'd gathered, surveillance photos, financial records, witness statements I'd collected anonymously. Blake didn't mention the source. He didn't need to. But I saw something in his expression during that press conference. A knowing look, like he'd figured out who'd really orchestrated Victor's downfall. He never came looking for me. Maybe he didn't want to know for sure. Maybe he was just grateful someone had done what he couldn't. Victor's arraignment was scheduled for the following week. His lawyer, a high-priced attorney named Richard Castellano, argued for bail, citing Victor's ties to the community and lack of flight risk. The judge denied it immediately. With federal charges, recorded confessions, and evidence of multiple murders, Victor Santino wasn't going anywhere except a maximum security holding facility. I didn't attend the arraignment. I watched the news coverage from my apartment, the same place where I'd held Evan as a baby, where we'd done homework together, where we'd argued about basketball and laughed at stupid movies. The apartment felt empty now, haunted by memories. 2 weeks after Victor's arrest, I received a phone call on my regular phone, not a burner. The number was blocked. Dominic Carter? A woman's voice, professional. Who's asking? My name is Amanda Pierce. I'm an assistant district attorney. Detective Morrison gave me your contact information. I'd like to speak with you about the Victor Santino case. My hand tightened on the phone. I don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Carter, I'm not calling to charge you with anything. I'm calling because we need your testimony. Victor Santino murdered your son. You have a right to see justice served in court. I have nothing to say. Victor's lawyer is claiming the confession we received was coerced, that it's inadmissible. Without additional evidence and testimony, some of the murder charges might not stick. We need you to. I hung up. I wasn't going to testify. I wasn't going to sit in a courtroom and relive Evan's death for lawyers and judges and a jury who'd forget about it a week later. I'd done what I needed to do. Victor was in custody. The evidence was overwhelming. What happened next was up to the system. The trial began 3 months later. I followed it through news reports, never attending in person. Victor had assembled a team of expensive lawyers who challenged every piece of evidence, questioned every witness, filed motion after motion. But the prosecution had too much. The drugs seized in the raid. Financial records showing years of money laundering. Testimony from Anton and 2 other men who'd flipped for reduced sentences. And most damaging, the recording of Victor's confession. The defense argued it was obtained illegally, that the voice might not even be Victor's, that it could have been fabricated or edited. But audio analysis confirmed it was genuine, and the details Victor had confessed matched evidence the FBI had independently verified. Week after week, the trial dragged on. Witnesses testified. Evidence was presented. Victor sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking smaller and older than the man who destroyed my life. I watched him on the courthouse steps during a recess, surrounded by cameras and reporters. Someone asked him if he had anything to say to the families of his victims. Victor looked directly at the camera. "I'm innocent. This is a setup. Someone wants me destroyed, and they're using the system to do it." He was right, of course, but he couldn't prove it. And more importantly, he couldn't escape it. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to distribute narcotics, racketeering, money laundering, and 3 counts of first-degree murder, including the murder of Evan Carter. I was sitting in my truck outside Evan's grave when I heard the news on the radio. The reporter's voice was excited, triumphant. Another dangerous criminal off the streets. Justice served. I turned off the radio and sat in silence. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Victor's lawyers argued for leniency, citing his age and health. The prosecution asked for life without parole. The judge spent 20 minutes delivering her decision. She detailed Victor's crimes, the lives he'd destroyed, the violence he'd spread through the community. Then she sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Victor would die in prison. There was no appeal that would change that, no legal loophole that would free him. It was over. That night, I drove to the cemetery. Evan's headstone was simple: his name, his dates, and a line that said, "Beloved son." I sat on the grass beside it like I'd done 100 times before. "It's done," I said quietly. "Victor's going to prison for the rest of his life. He'll never hurt anyone again." The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. "I know this doesn't bring you back. I know revenge doesn't fix anything. But I needed him to pay for what he did. I needed him to lose everything like I lost you." My voice cracked. For the first time since Evan died, I felt tears on my face. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I wasn't fast enough, strong enough. I'm sorry you died because of something you saw, something that had nothing to do with you." I sat there until the sun started setting, talking to my son, telling him about the trial, about Victor's face when the verdict was read. Finally, I stood up and placed my hand on the headstone. "I love you, Evan. I always will." Then I walked back to my truck and drove away. 6 months after Victor's sentencing, I stood outside the maximum security federal prison where he'd spend the rest of his life. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to see him behind bars to know he was suffering. I just needed to know he was there, caged, powerless, exactly where he deserved to be. Detective Blake Morrison found me in the parking lot, leaning against my truck. "Thought I might find you here," he said, walking over with his hands in his pockets. I wasn't planning to stay long. Blake nodded, studying my face. "The trial's over. Victor's locked up. You got what you wanted. Did I? Didn't you?" I looked at the prison walls, gray concrete and razor wire stretching toward the sky. My son's still dead. Victor being in prison doesn't change that. "No," Blake agreed. "But it means he can't hurt anyone else. That has to count for something." We stood in silence for a moment. Blake knew more than he'd ever admit about the anonymous tips, The perfectly timed evidence, the way Victor's organization had collapsed from the inside. But he'd never asked me directly, and I'd never confirmed. "What are you going to do now?" Blake finally asked. "Leave. There's nothing left for me here." "Where will you go?" "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can think about something other than revenge." Blake pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "If you ever need anything. Or if you just want to talk." I took the card and nodded. Blake walked back to his car, leaving me alone in the parking lot. I spent the next week packing up the apartment. Most of Evan's things I donated. His clothes, his books, his sports equipment. But I kept a few items. His favorite hoodie. A photo of us at his 8th grade graduation. A letter he'd written me for Father's Day 3 years ago, telling me I was his hero. That letter almost broke me. On my last day in the city, I visited Evan's grave one final time. The cemetery was empty except for a groundskeeper working near the far fence. I knelt beside the headstone and placed a small American flag next to the flowers I'd brought. Evan had always been proud when I told him about my military service, even though I never shared the hard parts. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I said quietly. "I don't know where I'm going yet. Maybe Montana. Maybe Oregon. Somewhere with mountains and space and silence." The wind rustled through the trees overhead. "Victor's in prison for life. 3 life sentences, no parole. He'll die behind bars, and everyone who helped him is either locked up or scattered." I made sure of that. I traced Evan's name on the headstone with my finger. "I know you wouldn't have wanted me to do what I did. You always believed in doing things the right way, following the rules, trusting the system. But the system failed you, Evan. It failed both of us. So I did what I had to do." My voice broke, and I had to stop for a moment. "I miss you every single day. I miss your laugh, your terrible jokes, your excitement about college. I miss arguing with you about which team would win the playoffs. I miss everything." I stood up slowly, my knees aching. "I hope wherever you are, you're at peace. And I hope someday I can find peace too. But right now, I just need to get away from this place and all the memories it holds." I placed my hand on the headstone one last time. "I love you, son. I always will." Then I walked back to my truck and drove away without looking back. 3 weeks later, I was sitting on the porch of a small cabin I'd rented in northern Montana. Mountains stretched across the horizon, snow-capped and ancient. The nearest town was 15 miles away. My closest neighbor was 3 miles down a dirt road. It was exactly what I needed. I'd started working as a handyman for the few families scattered around the area, fixing fences, repairing roofs, clearing fallen trees. Simple work that didn't require thinking about the past. One afternoon, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I'd given the number to only 3 people. But curiosity got the better of me. "Mr. Carter? This is Tristan Wade, my old Delta Force buddy, the one who'd shown up at Evan's funeral." "Tristan, how'd you get this number?" "I have my ways. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing. I heard about Victor Santino. Saw the trial on the news. 3 life sentences." I didn't respond. "You did that, didn't you?" Tristan's voice wasn't accusing, just knowing. "Took apart his whole organization piece by piece." "I don't know what you're talking about." Tristan chuckled softly. "Fair enough. I'm just calling to check on you. Make sure you're okay." "I'm fine." "You sure? Because the last time we talked, you looked like a man planning to do something he couldn't come back from." "I did what I needed to do. Now I'm trying to move forward." There was a long pause. "If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call me." "Understood. Understood. Take care of yourself, Dominic." Evan would want that. After we hung up, I sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The sky turned orange and purple, colors so vivid they almost hurt to look at. For the first time in a year, I felt something other than grief and rage. Not happiness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of peace. Victor Santino would spend the rest of his life in a cell, remembering every day that a father's love was more dangerous than any criminal empire. Hunter, Kyle, and Felix had lost everything they'd built. The organization that had taken my son was dust. Justice wasn't perfect. It didn't bring Evan back. It didn't erase the pain. but it was something. And for now, that had to be enough. So here's what I want to ask you. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I really want to know where my listeners are from around the world. And if this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more intense betrayal and revenge stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. But most importantly, tell me in the comments, what kind of stories do you want to hear next? Military revenge? Family betrayal? Cheating and justice? Let me know what type of stories you love, and I'll bring you exactly what you're looking for. Until we meet again in the next thriller, stay safe, stay strong, and remember, never underestimate someone who has nothing left to lose.